have now fled. They think they've gone over to the Taliban and are now in hiding, and they are treating this as an insider attack, but they still.
The Internet Governance Forums provides a platform for all stakeholders from developed and developing countries to exchange information and share good practices. This is a real multi-stakeholder event. It's not just about UN member states, but it's about UN member states together with civil society organizations and with private sector. Let's remember that only less than a month ago, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which highlights the crucial role that the Internet plays in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals and targets. The Internet can facilitate, expand the extent to which each of the goals can be implemented in each and every country of this world. We should take a more serious look at how to use the Internet as an engine for job creation, for income generation, for economic growth that is inclusive and equitable, and also as a way of providing equal opportunities to women and men as well as to the youth. These issues and many others will be all discussed at the Internet Governance Forum in Brazil. If you can't be there in person, join us online.
Welcome back to New World Next Week. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato of MediaMonarchy.com. You're a liar. You suck. But first, U.S. complains as Russia bombs its terrorists. Perhaps we need a little background from the New York Times first, James. Russians strike targets in Syria, but not ISIS areas. This published today, October 1st, as I come to you. And Russian aircraft carried out a bombing attack against Syrian opposition fighters on Wednesday, including at least one group trained by the CIA, eliciting angry protests from American officials and plunging the complex sectarian war into dangerous new territory. Russia's entry into the Syrian conflict, foreshadowed by a rapid military buildup in the past 3 weeks at an airbase in Syria, makes the possibility of a political settlement in Syria more difficult and creates a new risk of inadvertent incidents between American and Russian warplanes flying in the same area, and it adds a powerful but unpredictable combatant to a civil war that has already resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths and a flood of refugees. So we'll move and pivot a little bit to an article from Tony Cartalucci. U.S. complains as Russia bombs its terrorists, and he notes that New York Times article that we just read, the first couple of paragraphs for you, attempts to frame Russia's recent actions in Syria as dishonest and dangerous, and it reports, as we just noted for you, and again, everything is linked up as we always cite and source everything for you down in the show notes. This, of course, would only make Russia's actions dishonest or dangerous if groups trained by the U.S. CIA were, in fact, moderates. The U.S. claims that they are. However, of course, they're not. And thus, Russia's actions are duly justified, as is the expansion of their current policy for months now, after years of headlinings confirming the U.S. has been covertly arming militants in Syria for the purpose of overthrowing the government in Damascus, a narrative revolving around tens of thousands of these militants defecting to al-Nusra, the so-called Islamic State, ISIS, ISIL, IS, whatever you like, has been peddled to the public by the Western media and U.S. politicians to account for the apparent failure of America's alleged policy of creating an army of moderates to both fight ISIS/Al-Qaeda and the Syrian government. In reality, James, from the beginning, there were never any moderates, starting as early as 2007, years before the Syria war kind of got hot. The U.S., as a matter of policy, had long since decided to intentionally fund and support the Syrian Muslim Brotherhood, for all intents and purposes, the sort of political wing of al-Qaeda, if you will, and began arming militants affiliated with al-Qaeda itself. 2007, James, that's around the time that you and I really got into doing the work that we've been doing, and we've been doing New World Next Week since 2009. And we have covered this, I think, time and time again. And I'll throw it back to you and note that you have just written a piece about the real blowback in Syria in your International Forecaster.
Yeah, and the blowback isn't, oops, look at that, we accidentally created this Islamic State. No, the blowback is now the Russians, the Chinese, Iran, Hezbollah are coming together to form an actual military alliance that is actually going to target the terrorists in Syria and Iraq, which, of course, is anathema to the United States because Russia is bombing Al-Qaeda. So, of course, the U.S. is going to be angry about it. And I was just reflecting to myself yesterday, watching the propaganda roll out about these Russian strikes, that for someone who's been involved in this for the last 8 years with the website and dissecting this propaganda on a daily basis, it takes a lot to kind of knock me from my horse again, but it is just so amazing. I know that the corporate mainstream press has been controlled since a century and a half ago with Hearst and, then the JP Morgan interests and whatever buying up newspapers all across the country to serve their propaganda interests. But still, I have to wonder if it has ever been so blatant, the control over the media and the way that this is rolling out, because exactly as you would expect, finally someone is actually bombing these terrorists in Syria and Iraq. Amazing, but of course they have to frame it in a bad light, so they're going to throw out every trick in the book to try to make it look like this is some kind of crazy, unbelievable action, despite the fact that Russia has actually been invited by the Syrian government to do this, unlike the US and its partners. So this is, it's just, in one sense, it's funny to watch this rolling out. In another, it's amazing to see how brazen the propaganda is. Just one example of which that I'll throw out there. I recently retweeted Seedless, who was responding to a tweet by the White Helmets, this Soros-linked group of independent journalists in Syria that talked about Russia strike in Homs today, 33 civilians killed, because now civilians killed in airstrikes is a big news story. Of course, it isn't when the US and its partners are doing it, but now it's, every time Russia bombs anything, there's going to be reports like this. But they illustrated that tweet with a photograph that Seedless pointed out, oh, look at that, it's the exact same girl being held by the exact same man in the exact same position wearing the exact same clothes as 5 days ago when this photo was originally retweeted before the Russian airstrikes. So they're already putting out all of this ridiculous propaganda because Russia is bombing Al-Qaeda. That's what this boils down to. Please do read through that Cartolucci article in its entirety, because it has all of this backstory in it and how there is no such thing as moderate opposition, and all of this is just hand-wringing over the fact that something is actually being done to take out this terrorist boogeyman.
And what's Al-Qaeda but something created to go against Russia? It's just the more things change, the more they stay the same. James, you're talking about propaganda. How about this? BBC suggests nuclear destruction of Russia might be necessary, and a couple of other relateds, James, just for the war whores. New patch, the military patch the U.S. troops wear. They're going to be fighting in ISIS. Looks exactly like the ISIS logo. It's pretty awesome. You should lay your eyes on that. And Saudi Arabia will be heading the key human rights panel. So, James, a lot happened at the UN in the last week, and a lot of people are going to die because there's going to be more war and more lies surrounding Syria, just like we've talked about with the Saudis getting into it and more. But I think something that's also going to affect everyone, and that can affect all of us kind of somewhat sitting comfortably at our computers right now, and that's called global goals. The alt media has been on top of this for a while. I know I've had people kind of tweeting this at me for a long time, but this was, I think, kind of its big coming out party with bells and whistles and music and fanfare. The United Nations launches their 2030 Agenda Blueprint for a United World, and we'll take this from Activist Post. Have you heard of the global goals? And if you hadn't, you're going to hear of them by now because they've laid it out. The United Nations launched a set of 17 ambitious goals that it plans to achieve over the next 15 years. The formal name of this new plan is the 2030 Agenda, but those behind it decided that they needed something catchier to promote these ideas to the general population. The UN has stated that these new global goals represent a new universal agenda for humanity. Virtually every nation on the planet has willingly signed on to this new agenda, and you're going to participate whether you like it or not. Some of the biggest stars in the entire world have been recruited to promote the global goals. There's a great cult video with lots of celebs you can wash your brain with, but there was also the Global Citizen Festival held in Central Park in New York this last Saturday, where some of the biggest names in the music industry promoted these new global goals. The feel-good event was timed to coincide, of course, with the annual gathering of world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly, #UNGA, featuring performances by the We'll Say Yes to Anything band with Beyonce and Pearl Jam and Coldplay and the usual suspects. And it wasn't just the entertainment industry that was promoting this new UN plan for United World. That's right. Pope Francis traveled to New York to give the address that kicked off the conference where this new agenda was unveiled. So 17 is a lot of things, and we can't go over all of them here, but TruthStream Media kind of did a good bullet point, and they sort of did the easy translation of what they really mean with these 17 different goals. So, James, again, everything is linked. We implore people to go read all of these for themselves. I'm just going to pick my favorite of the 17 and mention it here. Goal number 7, ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. And again, as TruthStream kind of notes, that means smart grid. That means smart meters. That means your fridge, the Internet of Things. It's going to monitor and track everything that you do. And it may seem neat because, I've got a good workout routine, or the fridge told me I'm out of milk, but it's going to be so much more. James.
Yes, and let me pick a couple of my favorites from this list. It's such mealy-mouthed, wishy-washy nothingness that, of course, you have to agree with the ideas of these goals. End poverty in all its forms everywhere. Who is against that idea? But the question is, how do you do that? And I think the translation from TruthStream Media is pretty apt. Centralized banks, IMF, World Bank, Fed to control all finances, digital one world currency, and a cashless society. Hey, end poverty! Wow, and now we'll control absolutely every aspect of the global financial architecture and monetary system. Or goal number 2, I think, was also pretty to the point. End hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. Sustainable agriculture. Translation, GMO. Of course they're going to roll it out. Of course, we need these genetically modified monstrosities. They're so perfectly safe. And, by the way, yeah, the same interests that fueled the big industrial agricultural revolution of the 1960s are the same Rockefeller financial and interests that are funding the gene revolution of the biotech companies. But don't worry about that. Don't worry about all of that mess. It's all good. It's being promoted by the UN. What could possibly go wrong? Same crap, different name. I'm glad that a lot of people are already on board with this and already understand it, but please do help to spread this understanding before the global goals become the next must like a fashion accessory for the millennial crowd of support for, Facebook memes and things like that. That's what they're going to try. That's the way they're going to try to push this crap, and we have to come out against it as right from the beginning.
That's maybe the best setup for me to mention the last thing swirling around the UN is something that probably deserves a whole segment of its own. James, we've never waded into any of the Gamergate things together. I did one interview on it, but it's a huge mess to say the very least. And the way sort of Breitbart, their headline basically says, UN wants to censor internet to save feminist feelings. And that was in reference to the you suck and you're a liar. And those are Anita Sarkeesian and Zoe Quinn going to the United Nations talking about cyberbullying and all these sorts of things. And they've got a report. It's called Cyber Violence Against Women and Girls, a Global Wake-Up Call. And I think it's at least worth noting that even its would-be supporters have to admit that it's poorly written and terrible, and you can't really enforce any of that. But that's just another element, and that ties into those global goals of basically saying, don't slander anyone on the internet or we'll take away your internet license and you won't. Oh, internet? Yeah, we're working on that too. So, James, I think in closing, I think it's kind of funny. I was kind of dancing around the fear of it a couple of weeks ago when we covered the then upcoming Pope Fest USA, but you came right out and said it, and I'll sort of paraphrase it and update it here. If terror was real, they would have blown up the UN with every misleader in there all at once. Putin, Obama, Pope, Rouhani, Netanyahu, all of them, all at once. But it didn't, because it's not. And I think that's an important thing to note. And we had all of the fear kind of ratcheting up. Remember, James, September is going to be the end of the world, right?
Oh, yeah. Did that happen yet? Or maybe it's a couple weeks late. Maybe it's sleeping in.
Sie ist Umweltschützerin, Bürgerrechtlerin und Feministin und hat 1993 den Alternativen Nobelpreis bekommen für ihr Zusammendenken von Ökologie und Feminismus. Sie ist Vorsitzende des International Forum on Globalization. Sie ist Mitglied im Club of Rome und im Exekutivkomitee des Weltzukunftsrates und ist hierzulande wahrscheinlich hauptsächlich bekannt für ihr Engagement gegen Gentechnik, Biopiraterie und die üblen Machenschaften transnationaler Konzerne. We are very happy to have you here. Begrüßt mit mir Vandana Shiva.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be back in Berlin. We were just remembering, Barbara and I, the amazing programs and movements that were organized in 1988 when there was still a wall. And I remember we talked about how walls like that should not exist. And today we live in a Berlin without walls, and there are many more walls to be taken down. And I think one of the biggest walls that needs to come down is the wall of illusions. Illusions like growth. Illusions that tell us that the more money that moves in the economy and society, the better off we are. And I think the reason so many of you are here today, you're catching on that that's an illusion, and you want to build another reality. All that economic growth measures is the flow of money. It doesn't work out how the money is created. It doesn't work out in what direction the money flows. I was trained as a physicist, and one of the first things you learn in physics is the vector. What direction? Is it going to destroy nature or build nature? Is it going to destroy society or build community? The vector is missing in the economic growth indicators, as is the actual state of affairs. That's the other thing we learn in physics, that things have states. In quantum mechanics, you have quantum states. In classical mechanics, you have classical states, but still the indicators that tell you what is where and how it's behaving. Economic growth indicators tell you nothing. They just give you an anonymous figure. And on that basis, we're supposed to bow down to that indicator and let our lives be wiped out, let the planet's life be wiped out. One reason why we can't trust these indicators is because money itself has become an unreliable measure of the economy. It was anyway never intended to reflect the actual value of things. It was supposed to be a means. And that's why our banknotes say, I promise to pay the bearer. It was just a promise. It was merely a means of accessing resources. But today it's even lost that mooring in real resources. Money can make itself and multiply itself like a virus. Look at how it multiplied itself over the value of subprime real estate in the United States and brought the entire world economy down. The subprime crisis was based on new instruments that have been created to make money multiply itself. You give one unreliable loan, you get 25% interest out of that, you bundle it up, out of that securitization you get much more, out of derivatives, collateral debt obligations, you get further and further removed from reality. And I remember Einstein said something, he said, a symptom of insanity is to keep doing the same thing again and again, expecting a different outcome. So when these collateral debt obligations started to go wrong, they squared it. And they said CDO squared. When that went wrong, they cubed it. And they'd have put it to the power of 4 if Wall Street hadn't come down in the middle. Second reason why we have to question economic growth and go beyond growth is because the increased flow of money is increasingly taking place at the cost of nature and people. A living forest doesn't contribute to economic growth, it contributes to life. And the first movement I was very privileged and honored to be part of was the famous Chipko movement, which fought against commercial forestry, which contributed to growth. Every tree cut registered in the market, and it contributed to growth. Every living tree contributed to life. And the women of my region came out and said, we are going to hug the trees. You can't cut the trees till you kill us. In 1981, we got a logging ban in the source of the Ganges River, in the high altitude mountains of where our mighty rivers start, because the women's wisdom that the most important function of the trees is stabilizing flows of soil and water, that's the economy of nature, the real oikos, the real household, in which growth must take place, not chopping down trees and having this much square foot of timber traded, this much royalties collected out of destruction of forests into dead timber. The interesting thing is, governments are now, as was said in the introduction, revisiting the idea of growth. I remember my dear friend and sister, Marilyn Waring, wrote a fat book called If Women Mattered. And she had become the youngest MP in New Zealand and had been very important in making New Zealand a nuclear-free zone. She was very puzzled that every time she went to Parliament to ask for more money for childcare or more money for welfare, she would be told there's no money. And every time there was a defense budget, there was always money. So she decided to investigate, where do these growth figures come from? Where does this gross national product and gross domestic product assessment come from? And she realized, she went back to the United Nations system of account keeping and found out that it was a very artificial construction to mobilize money for the wars. And the definition of growth was, if you produce what you consume, then you don't produce. Since nature recycles everything and therefore produces what she consumes, she doesn't produce. All of the sustenance economies of the third world, of the household, women, we produce and we consume. That doesn't count. So the real economy of nature and people is turned into a zero in the very definition of GNP and GDP. Aristotle actually distinguished between two economies. He called one chrematistics, related to money making, and he called the other oikonomia, related to the maintenance of life. And that's the real issue. What economic growth is promoting is extremely efficient ways of money making by a few, at the cost of the lives of people, lives of community, lives of the planet. And that is why we have to go beyond it. India stands out as such a conspicuous example in this growth debate. China and India are the two countries that are always cited these days. And I say these days because in the decade of the 90s, we used to be told in India, we've got to be like the tigers and the dragons of Southeast Asia. In 1997, their economies collapsed. And growth needs poster children. The giant countries of Asia, China, and India have become the new poster children of growth, but we'll go the same way because we are being asked to predate on the very things that support us, nature's economy and the sustenance economy. So India has 9% growth. But what's growing? Are people better off? Are our ecosystems healthier? No. You can look at every sector. You can look at land and you can look at biodiversity, you can look at food, you can look at water. And let me tell you a few stories of how exactly the 9% growth that makes India a shining India is rooted in the destruction of the very foundation of our civilization that has stood the test of time for more than 10,000 years. One of the arguments repeatedly used is the reason we need high growth rates is growth will lead to poverty removal. And a very simple metaphor is used. If you don't have growth, the cake won't go bigger. If the cake is not bigger, the poor won't have a bigger share. But economic growth is stealing the cake of the poor. In fact, it's stealing the bread of the poor. In the few days before leaving home, I've been busy with supporting farmers across India who are defending their land. On the 9th of May, just outside Delhi, farmers who were protesting the land grab and land wars were shot at. According to the farmers, more than 70 people have been killed. According to the government, 4 people have been killed. There is not an investigation yet to confirm what exactly is the number. But homes were burned. 5,000 police surrounded this group of villagers. And like I mentioned, this is just outside Delhi. In the name of building an expressway, 5 new mega townships are being built. One of these townships is a sports city. And the Formula 1 track is being built on it. That's what got the farmers really angry. The farmers had been paid 300 rupees for the land by the government, which appropriates the land on behalf of private interests. The private interests sell off that same land at when I say 300 rupees, it's for a square meter, the dimension of this table. That's what the farmers got. The big business sells it off, the speculators sell it off at 600,000 rupees, the same land. Just moves from one hand to the other. That's a 200,000% increase in growth in the money economy. So if you're only looking at that, of course more money is flowing. There are more billionaires being created. And 100 of the new billionaires of India now control 1/3 of India's economy. If they are allowed to keep grabbing the land and water of the people, they'll control 2/3 of the economy. But what happens to the people? They're left without land, without livelihood, without food, without a future. 1 million young men are unemployed in this area, and in the first few days when they get the money for compensation, they have a few drinks, they get a few motorbikes, they run around, and then it's over, and they're unemployed. And beyond a point, as an unemployed person, what do you turn to for a living? Crime. Crime contributes to growth hugely, but does it create healthy societies? The other area is where a mega steel plant is being created. Supposed to be a Korean company. We did the analysis. It's not Korean at all. It's owned by Wall Street now, since the privatization of Korea's assets. The farmers will lose 4 million rupees an acre because of very prosperous farming. Doesn't count in the national accounts because they grow the betel leaf. A betel, it's called the pan, which Indians use as a digestive. It's not in the international trading system. The company itself, it's supposed to be the biggest investment in India, $12 billion. In 8 years out of mining alone, they'll have recovered this. They have a captive mine, a captive port, a captive power plant. This growth economy is an economy of captivity. And the place we see this most dramatically is in the field of agriculture. I was introduced as a person who deals with GMOs. Let me tell you the story of growth in the seed sector. India is the land of cotton. Gandhi spun cotton for our freedom. He brought out the spinning wheel and said, let's make khadi. So for us, cotton is a fiber of freedom. But today it has become a fiber of slavery. Monsanto entered India in 97-98 with its GM cotton. It entered illegally. I had to file a case in our Supreme Court. They were stopped from selling commercially their seeds, and it took them 4 years to get the appropriate approvals. When they did, the cost of seed went up from 5 to 10 rupees a kilogram to 8,000% higher, more than 4,000 rupees a kilogram. 10 billion rupees was what Monsanto was extracting annually in terms of royalty payments. That's a lot of growth, but it's growth for Monsanto. What does it do to the farmer who gets trapped in non-renewable GM seeds that have intellectual property patent protection? The first thing is, seed must give rise to seed. That's the nature of seed. So there's a lot of growth when seed becomes seed, because seed multiplies, seed gets rejuvenated, seed is distributed. But non-renewable seed doesn't allow seed to go to seed. You have to buy seed every year. So in nature, there's a new scarcity created, but for Monsanto, there's a new multiplication of profits created. When Monsanto extracts 8,000% increase in seed costs, and the seed itself is not pest control technology, one of the biggest myths of genetic engineering is that it increases the production of food and we must have it in order to remove hunger. In fact, there is not a single case in which genetic engineering has led to an increase in a crop. Our native seeds are producing more because we do seed saving in Navdanya, the movement has started, and we've just collected field data. Monsanto's average is 500 kilograms an acre, and farmers growing native seeds organically are harvesting 900 to 1,000 kilograms an acre. Farmers have to buy pesticides. There's new pests that have been created. The bollworm has become resistant. They're now bringing a second Bt gene into the crop called Bolgard 2. The result of it means debt for farmers. And farmers cannot pay that debt back because with cotton is associated a $4 billion subsidy in the US, which then dumps cotton on an international market, and WTO failed in Cancun because of the cotton issue. Farmers know very soon that they can never pay this debt back, and the advertisements that told them either that they would be millionaires or that there was white gold being sent from heaven above using our divinities and gods as sales agents. Within a year or two, farmers are trapped in unpayable debt, and 250,000 Indian farmers have committed suicide in the last decade as seed has got controlled. 60 Indian companies that used to sell cotton seed are now controlled by Monsanto through licensing arrangements. Worldwide, Monsanto is running very fast to acquire seed companies. Seminis, the biggest seed company for vegetables, has been bought up. Just day before, the No Patents on Seed movement sent out a circular saying the melon, which has been bred conventionally using Indian melon strains that are resistant to a virus, have now been patented by Monsanto. Every patent means growth in the profits of Monsanto. Every patent means the growth of debt for the farmer, the growth of suicides, but that never shows up in the economic growth figures. The same is the case for food. The figures were mentioned, 1 billion people without food worldwide. But the sad thing is another 2 billion people who are eating are suffering from diseases related to food, obesity, diabetes, hypertension. Because what we are eating now is no more food. I call it anti-food. Because it's doing the opposite to our body from what food should be doing. Food should be nourishing us. This food is killing us. Now, first the companies make money selling us junk food, anti-food. Then people fall ill. They make money. It's the same companies that sell the food, same companies sell the medicine. Then they make money through the treatment. There's no limit to the profits. There's no limits to the growth. But there's a huge limit to the people's lives. We used to grow and eat 8,500 plant species. Now only 8 are traded globally. Only 8. And most of them are corn, soya, canola, cotton, because that's where the royalties and patents are associated. The result of this has been that in the last decade and a half of globalization and trade liberalization, India has gone from a food self-reliant country to a country of hunger. Our per capita consumption of food has dropped from 171 kilograms per capita per year to less than 150 kilograms per capita per year. We have a report done by Navdanya, Why is Every Fourth Indian Hungry?, analyzing the roots of this new hunger. Every third Indian woman is today so desperately malnourished that she loses. She either dies herself or her baby dies. And if the baby survives, 43% of Indian children, which is half of the world's severely malnourished children, are so deprived of food that they are what is called wasted. Wasted means you'll never grow up to be fully functional mentally or physically. So growth is taking place in terms of having reduced food to a commodity. In the markets, it's wonderful. Deutsche Bank had an advertisement. Do you like the prices of food going up? Then come and invest in the Euro Food Fund, because now food is a subject of speculation like the real estate was in America. But for people, it means hunger. And if you remember, in the first few days of both the Tunisian as well as the Egyptian movement, it was the price of food that was at the heart. People were showing bread in terms of why they were angry and why they were discontented. Coca-Cola was mining 1.5 million liters a day in a village called Plachimada. Huge growth. They take that water for free, put it into a bottle, put manufactured by Coca-Cola, as if they create water on this planet, and then they sell it to you for 12 rupees. Lots of growth. But it meant the wells of the women went empty. They were walking 10 miles, and my Lamma, who passed away 2 years ago, said, why should we walk further? This company should close. It took a very strong women's movement, but eventually that plant was shut down. Growth stopped, but the water came back. But there are two other reasons why we need to move beyond growth, beyond the fact that it is an illusion. Today, growth can only grow at the cost of democracy. It can only grow by destroying free societies. In Europe, it means by dismantling the welfare system. It means putting structural adjustment first, putting the recovery of banks first, letting people's jobs, welfare, education, health go to the dogs. We're seeing that in the 4 countries under structural adjustment in Europe: Greece, Portugal, Spain, where there are protests right now, and Ireland. Remember, Ireland was the roaring tiger on the growth model. Look where growth brought it. But it isn't just democracy that is being destroyed. Growth today in our parts of the world is coming through the barrel of a gun. And we can't afford this. We can't afford the militarization of our societies. We can't afford our farmers and tribals to be killed just because there's huge money to be made out of mining of bauxite for aluminium and iron ore for steel and all the rare metals that go into everything we touch. Growth today is mining our future. And that is why not only are we as citizens saying we'll go beyond growth, and we are smart enough to shape a society beyond growth and live better in the process. A country, tiny country in my part of the world, Bhutan, years ago said gross national product and gross domestic product are mismeasures of the economy. We will treat gross national happiness as our objective and end of society. And they're doing it. The Prime Minister has invited me to help Bhutan go 100% organic. 100% organic means zero sales of chemicals, growth will come down. No GMOs, growth will come down. But farmers will be more prosperous, the ecosystems will be healthier, biodiversity will flourish, rivers will flow clean. We have two options. We have two options before us. Either to recognize that there are limits of the earth, that we are part of the earth and build earth community and earth democracy, or allow the total devastation of this planet, and with the devastation of the planet, an extinction of the human species with very fast growth. The only thing the growth model is leading us to is our own extinction. No other species has been stupid enough to do that. Surely the human species should rise with higher intelligence and higher emotions, love, and values, and I know we can do it. This dinosaur of a false model must collapse. Let's show the way before it causes too much destruction. Thank you.